Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm Kelly Dewar, Senior Community Solutions Specialist for Maddie's Fund. Dr. Segerson was called away for a family emergency, so I'm filling in as host for today's meeting. So please let us know who you are and where you're from in the chat area. We will get started in just a few minutes, but I'd like to mention a few things while people are still trickling in. If you've recently read a book, viewed, or listened to something that you think the rest of us might enjoy, please share it in the chat. Also, if you'd like to make an announcement about an upcoming event of interest to our behavior group, please unmute yourself and tell us about it, or enter the info about it in the chat area. These 1-hour webinars are recorded and will be available on Maddie's Pet Forum within 4 days of this webcast. You can access the previous recordings by clicking on the link in the chat and going to the Maddie's Monthly Behavior Connection Library. Join the public group to receive notifications about upcoming meetings and recordings. If you have questions for our speaker, please post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen rather than in the chat area. We will want to get us to as many as we have time for this after the presentation, and we'll post any questions we don't get to in Maddie's Pet Forum. So let's get started with today's presentation. Welcome to Maddie's Monthly Behavior Connection, a monthly webcast where we learn about topics of interest to those of us who are interested in animal behavior, providing support to keep pets in homes or supporting pets while in shelter or foster care. Our guest today is Devan Amundsen. Devan Amundsen is a certified dog trainer and behavior consultant with over 10 years of experience working with not just dog owners, but dogs in shelters, assistance dogs, and other types of working dogs. Devan currently teaches college courses about dog training, dog behavior, animal sheltering, scent detection, and assistance dogs at the Bachelor of Science and Associate of Science levels at Bergen College of Canine Studies in Sonoma County, California. He works full-time at Paws for Purple Hearts, training assistance dog for veterans, supports Oakland Animal Services as the dog behavior coordinator, and founded Animal Welfare United, which provides education to those in animal welfare. Today, Devan will be talking to us about removing behavior-related barriers to adoption. So, welcome, Devan.
Hello. Hopefully everybody can hear me here. I'm joining today from the office. I've got my assistance dog that I'm meeting for the first time here, my assistance dog in training. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. So I do want to throw out there kind of out the gate that it can be really tempting to look for like an immediate solution to what are ultimately really complex problems in the animal shelter space. Especially when we start talking about dog behavior, we're talking about some really multifaceted issues here. So I want to recognize the complexity of what we're talking about here, and hopefully present some solutions that are practical, but also kind of acknowledge the complex world that we exist in. So let's dive in. The first kind of stopping point, and I apologize, I just added this slide because I've been thinking about this a lot. So it's not in the PDF that I shared with everybody. But I just want to throw out there to start here that we need to recognize in the beginning of this conversation whether we're having a safety conversation or whether we're having an adoption counseling conversation. So kind of the first checkpoint here when we're talking about dog behavior, we're talking about removing these behavioral barriers. I need to recognize, am I having a safety conversation where I'm asking, is this dog safe to be placed in the world? Is this dog within the scope of my adoption program? Like my adoption program has deemed this dog as reasonably safe. I have the support system for this dog post-placement. If the answer to that is yes, I have determined that this dog is safe for my program, it fits within my program, and I've deemed that it is reasonably safe place in the community. Then we move on to kind of the bulk of this presentation, which is into that adoption counseling part of this. So again, so I just kind of wanted to establish that we're not I don't want this presentation to be perceived as that we are kind of determined, like removing safety concerns, right? If we're having problems, if we're having these really complex problems with dogs that are causing serious damage to other animals or that are just kind of falling outside the scope of our adoption program, we're in a different conversation there than the adoption counseling conversation. So once we've moved past the safety conversation and we're into that adoption counseling conversation, we want to start looking at what the function of training and enrichment is intended. What's the intended function within the shelter? Because oftentimes like when I get called out, when I'm working with the shelter, we start the conversation in this like, well, I just want to provide training to the dogs. And that's fantastic, but we've got to keep our end goal in mind, which is to get this dog out of the shelter. I don't want to house this dog in my shelter long term. I want them to get out there, either into a foster home or into an adoptive home. So any activity that I do in the shelter with that dog should really be geared towards that outcome, towards either adoption or foster. Once I've passed that safety conversation where I'm looking at, okay, do I need to divert to rescue or euthanasia? So once we've identified that this activity that is really time and labor intensive in the shelter needs to serve a function, I need to identify the function. We might look at, I want to reduce length of stay. So I want to be providing some training to the dogs that encourage people to get in here sooner and get this dog out. So maybe we do more evaluation as part of our training. If my goal is to reduce length of stay. If my goal is to reduce overall fear, anxiety, stress, I might pick some sort of measurement there, make sure that I'm measuring current fear, anxiety, stress. So am I doing daily rounds where I'm marking down kind of a 1 to 5 scale on how I'm feeling these dogs' fear, anxiety, stress is? And I wanted to, keep the context in mind there. Where is this dog's fear, anxiety, stress in comparison to kind of our general population of dogs? Obviously, we're going to skew higher. So if the intent is to reduce fear, anxiety, stress, I'm going to tailor a lot of my training around that. I'm going to tailor a lot of these activities around that outcome there. Oftentimes I hear training kind of pitched as I'm going to make the dog more adoptable, which I love the sentiment behind that, but I do want to kind of dive into what we mean when we say something like more adoptable. I have a soft spot for dogs that are super rowdy. I like the dogs that I'm a 6'4" tall guy with a beard. I like the dog that like crashes into me and jumps all over me. I find that really endearing. So to reduce that, right, is not acknowledging that there's people like me that are looking for a dog that might want that more physical engagement with that dog right out the gate. And I'm actually going to be a little bit, I don't want to say put off, but a little concerned to a certain degree if that dog walks up and sits really quietly. I'm like, maybe you're a little bit too smart for me, right? That dog that's like problem solving 10 steps ahead of me, maybe that's not going to quite fit into my home life. So what do we mean when we say more adoptable? When we're saying that we want the dog to be more adoptable, are we taking into consideration that there's a huge variety of people that are looking for dogs? And my idea of what that ideal dog is in my home is probably at odds with many people that are looking for dogs, that are coming to the shelter looking for dogs. If the goal is to reduce behavior problems, I also want to dive into that as well. What do we mean when we say behavior problem? Do we know that this is a problem in the home, or are we just seeing it in the shelter? Right? Because if I'm just seeing it in the shelter, then maybe we have a disclosure kind of conversation there, where we're saying, I need to let you know that I'm seeing this, but my assessment is that this dog is probably fine outside the shelter, right? We've put the dog out in foster. This behavior doesn't translate outside of there, but I do want to let you know that we're seeing this in the shelter just in case it comes up at some point in the future. So if we're talking about behavior problems, I do want to dive into that a little bit here, because we have to recognize the context where we're training, and we have to recognize the context for where the dog is learning these skills, because we're paddling upstream here. We've got the environment itself working against us here, and we're working in the shelter, right? I'm like overcoming fear, anxiety, stress, and then trying to introduce skills training to the dog. And that's really asking a lot. And most of the time, at least from my personal experience, and the experience that I've had talking shelters all over the place, is that ultimately a better use of my time is probably coaching fosters, coaching adopters, coaching potential surrenders, right? If we're talking about surrendering for behavior problems, my time's probably better spent over there, not spending 30 minutes with this one dog today working on some sort of skill. So I want to take all of that into consideration when I'm looking at what sort of behavior modification program or training that I'm trying to offer within the shelter. The really big thing for me is the context where that behavior is happening. Especially coming from sheltering. I was in sheltering for, I've been in sheltering for the last 10-ish years, a little over 10 years, I think, at this point. Coming from that world and coming into the assistance dog world, where we are very cognizant in the assistance dog world of the difficulty of generalization. So generalization being, I train the dog in the training room, where it's fairly controlled, and then I go out into the world and I expect the dog to know the same behavior, right? That generalization process is very deliberate, specific, and can take a long time depending on the dog and depending on kind of the rest of the situation there. So, when we look at the complexities of generalization, we've got to look at, if I intend to do that in the shelter, right? I intend to teach the dog how to sit in the shelter, and then it's going to translate to a home. I'm really asking a lot of that dog in that moment. And I'm also asking a lot of that trainer or that handler, and the trainer in the shelter. So we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure, essentially. If we are expecting to train behaviors in the shelter and have those translate over to the adopter, we might be setting ourselves up for failure. And I just want to call that out and say that if you've been trying to do this, if you've been trying to work on behaviors in the shelter, it's not translating into a home, or the adopters just aren't following through or something, you're probably seeing the effects of it. You're probably seeing the challenges with training within the shelter. This is an inherent problem. It's not you, and it's not your adopters either. But there are plenty of times where it's like, hey, I have to house you in the shelter for some period of time, and the behaviors that you're showing here in the shelter do pose some level of safety risk. We've sent you out to foster, or we've got a report from the surrendering party that tells us that this behavior is probably shelter specific. Okay, so then I might design a training plan, or I might put together some sort of protocol that's really just specific to the shelter. These are shelter specific handling activities, that are things that handling requirements. So things that I need from you to be able to handle you safely in the shelter. Very different conversations here. I was at the HSUS Expo this last week, and I had a couple of questions that ultimately I started just answering borderline a canned response of, is this activity that I'm doing, that I'm investing a lot of time and mental energy in, is this activity directly associated with getting this dog out of the shelter, or is it just making housing them more comfortable for me? Because if the answer is that it's just making housing more comfortable for me, and it's not necessarily getting that dog closer to adoption, I might need to rethink where I'm putting my resources there. Because my resources are probably better spent doing an activity that's going to get that dog out of the shelter, especially if you are your shelter's trainer or behavior consultant. So really take an honest look at your program, take an honest look at what you're doing on a day-to-day level, and look at, is my time being spent trying to get these animals out into foster homes or into adoptive homes or am I doing things that are really just kind of, I'm trying to solve an impossible problem, but like making dogs comfortable in the shelter, which we have tons and tons of research and tons of people that you can find on Maddie's pet forum, that'll tell you that I can't make them comfortable in the shelter, or I can't get them the same level of comfort that they would have in a home in an institutionalized setting. I'm trying to do the impossible there, or at least incredibly difficult. So take an honest look at your programs, take an honest look at what you're doing. Ask yourself, is this activity that I'm doing getting the dog out of the shelter? All right, but I do want to dive into some practical examples because I love talking about philosophy and theory and all this fun stuff. I love that. But I want to provide some tangible kind of solutions for some of the things that I know that we're all dealing with when we're working with dogs in shelters. So first, I want to touch back on this previous point that I made of asking what a behavior problem really is. What you define as a behavior problem, essentially, what you define as a behavior problem might not be a behavior problem to somebody else. You say that barking at people coming in the house is a behavior problem that needs to be fixed because you don't like that in your home. But there are plenty of people that are looking for a dog that alerts them that there's somebody there. I know with my personal dog, I like 1 or 2 barks to let me know that there's somebody there. And there's been plenty of times where he's been wrong about whether there's somebody there or not. And there's been plenty of times where I've been wrong. And I've gone and checked the door like, promise there's nobody here. And I open up the door and there's somebody standing there like, hi. Didn't expect to see you there. So what you designate as a behavior problem in the shelter might be more a reflection of what you deem a problem in your home versus where this dog really wants to be. I think the biggest one for me is when we talk about leash reactivity, which I know that all of us struggle with some level of leash reactivity. And it seems like everybody wants to take their dogs for a walk. And ultimately, I'm going to accept some of the responsibility for that as a trainer in this field. We've advocated for taking dogs for very frequent like daily walks, multiple times a day, going for walks. Walks are this great activity. And the reality is that not every dog enjoys going for walks. For some dogs, walks are stressful. They're overwhelming. There's too much going on out there, especially if I'm working with an under-socialized dog that maybe didn't have the best start to life. If I'm working with a really high drive dog that like wants to walk 4 times as fast as I am, that walk's probably not doing what I want it to do. There are better ways that we can explore to exercise our dogs other than walks. So for that leash reactive dog that's saying, I hate going outside, I hate being in this huge, overwhelming space, let's look at, can I find a home for this dog that isn't really that into walks? For one, I've got my dog. He doesn't really enjoy going for walks. He will if I ask him to, and if I set him up for success there, but he doesn't really enjoy it. And I also don't really enjoy going for walks with my dogs. I prefer other activities. We can talk about those a little bit more later. I'm going to run out of time if I start going too far off on that. But looking at treadmill training, looking at like FitPaws has some really cool equipment. And we were just talking about this for people that live in areas where I can't go outside parts of the year. So like I've got friends in Phoenix, Arizona. It's about to be way too hot out there to be going for walks multiple times a day, unless I'm going super, super early in the morning and late at night. And even then it's pretty hot. And same thing goes for my friends over in the like northern states, right? Where if we're snowed in, I can't go outside. And then what? Have I been working on exercises that I can do in the home? Right? So check out some FitPaws equipment, check out a treadmill. If your shelter needs a treadmill, most of the time, if you just ask for one on social media, somebody has one that's currently being used as a closet in their house. They're happy to donate it over to you. So let's look at some creative solutions when we're looking at defining what a behavior problem really is. So here's kind of just building on that question. When I'm looking at what sort of training or behavior modification I want to do with this dog, the question that I might want to ask is which specific skills does this dog lack currently that make some activity difficult or impossible for the current owner? So if we say pulling on leash is the problem behavior, okay, well, what is the activity associated with that, right? I want to be able to take my dog for walks. For you or for the dog? Because it's for you and the dog doesn't like it, maybe you should go for walks and at your own speed, and let's have a different activity for the dog. We'll get into some specifics here in a second, because I do want to pitch some specific examples, kind of actionable take homes for the presentation. But kind of the backbone of this conversation here, or kind of where I want to start this conversation, is asking, what are those skills? What are those specific skills that I need to work on, or that I want to work on with this dog, that make some associated activity difficult or impossible for the owner? I think this also makes more sense as we keep going here. Whenever I'm training in the shelter, I want to be training toward conversations, not necessarily this finished behavior. Right? I think a lot of times, especially, in dog training in general, we're always kind of shooting for this mythical goal, like end goal, where I say, I want the dog to sit when I say sit, and they're going to sit in this perfect position. Or when I say heel, the dog will fall over into that perfect heel and look up at me and then have that little like prancy walk next, right? If we're doing competition level obedience, that's our finish line. For most of our dogs in the shelters, we're probably not getting to that point, and that really shouldn't be our finish line. Our finish line here in the shelter is probably just training toward that conversation with that foster or training toward that conversation with the adopter. But what does that look like? I promise that I am going for something tangible here. So my 10 foundational cues, they're the only ones that I recommend working on in the shelter, are these 10 here. We're going to dive into each one of these in a little bit more detail, but I try to keep things as simple as possible for my volunteers, for my fosters, and for my adopters. If I have a list of like 150 commands for the dogs, which we have that for the assistance dogs here, learning how to train each of those and learning how to apply each of those is literally a 2-week-long process where we sit down with people for 8 hours a day and we go through all of those cues, all of those commands. That is a lot to ask an adopter. So let's keep it really, really simple. Let's go with 10 cues. And ideally, let's pick out like 1 or 2 that we're talking to a potential adopter about. 1 or 2 cues with this dog, just enough to get you started, just enough to get you feeling comfortable with this, with whatever activity is challenging with this dog. And then move on, right? I don't necessarily need to know all of these. I just need to know a select few of them. So here's my 10 cues. I actually have handouts for all of these things that I will happily share on Maddie's Pet Forum, or if somebody here wants to share them. I've got some handouts that make talking about these really easy with your potential adopters and your fosters. So those are the 10 cues, and here are the 3 life skills that are kind of my primary talking points whenever I'm talking with fosters or adopters about behavior problems. I'm going to associate those or bring those behavior problems back to one of these 3 points. So is the challenge that we're trying to, or is the challenge greeting humans? If so, what are the specific skills that this dog needs in order to greet humans successfully? Right? Instead of saying, I want the dog to like all people, which is a wildly unrealistic expectation, I want to ask, what specific skills does this dog need to greet humans in a way that is polite? Right? And we'll go through each one of these in a little bit more detail, but be thinking back to those 10 cues. Which of those things do I need to greet people politely? Like, can I narrow it down to like 2? Walking by other dogs. Does every dog in the world need to be totally off-leash social with other dogs? No. My dog has slow transitions with new dogs that come into the home. He prefers a little bit more structure in those interactions. I've got other friends' dogs that they like just kind of meeting off leash, free, whatever. So it's okay to have. I'm sure that most people here are going to already know that. I'm not saying anything revolutionary here, but not all dogs need to be off leash social. So what I do need, though, is for you to be able to walk by other dogs, right? I need you to be able to pass by, and the distance can vary there. Do I need you to be able to pass on the sidewalk? No, because I can walk into the street. I can get behind a car, right? And maybe my starting point is that I'm like a football field away from another dog, and that's passing right now. So walking by other dogs, one of those critical life skills for me, one of those kind of conversation points that I want to bring things back to. But I want to allow some flexibility there. And same thing goes for greeting humans, right? Do I need to walk up, sit, shake for every human? No. Can I just sit next to you and look at the human and maybe wave from a distance, right? Do a little like paw raise. That greeting can look very different for every dog, depending on that dog's specific personality, depending on their training background, all that kind of stuff. And then being home alone is an unfortunate reality for most of our dogs, even the assistance dogs that we work with. Those dogs still need to be left home alone from time to time, or at least pass off to somebody else. So it's going to happen at some point. You're going to have to be left alone. What does that look like? Well, there's a lot of room. There's a lot of wiggle room in there. Can you be in a crate? Can you be behind an X pen? Can you be in a safe, contained room, outside with appropriate outdoor setup? Right, being home alone has some range in there for what that looks like for that dog. And those are the conversations that we want to have with adopters and fosters, right? We have to be home alone for some period of time. What that looks like can look different for everybody. And the more I try to fit it into a box and say the dog has to be in a crate when they are left alone, and that is the end of the story, I'm going to start fighting with dogs who have a really negative association with the crate. And I'm going to start fighting with people that are like, I don't have the space in my house to have an additional crate. And even the pop-up one, like, I don't have the time to do that. And then the pop-up one, the dog's escaping from it. If we have a concrete rule about the dog has to do this and has to do that, we're missing out on all the nuance of dog behavior. And again, this is a complicated issue that we are trying our best to navigate our way through. So let's start diving into each one of these here. I'm going to put these through the lens of the cues, those 10 critical cues for me. Sit or down, don't necessarily need both. You can choose one or the other, depending on the dog's body mechanics. One might be more comfortable than another one. But essentially, I'm asking the dog to put their butt or their belly on the ground. I've stopped using sit more like the last 5 years or so of my career. I've stopped using sit quite as much as I used to. But there's obviously still, there's a reason why sit is like our default dog trainer behavior, because it has a lot of practical uses there. The sit can communicate, I'm stopped, I'm listening to what you're asking for. I like using a sit as just kind of a baseline of like, can I ask you for something else right now? Right? I'm about to ask you for a heel across the street, but if I can't get a sit right here, maybe I don't do that heel across the street. If I have to argue with you about a sit, probably not going to ask you to go greet that person. If I'm arguing with you about a down, let's sit or down, right? If I'm arguing with the dog about that, or I'm struggling with it, I have to break out my treat bag. I've got to like lure the dog through it or something. I've got to like go back to those foundational training pieces. If we're there, let's not keep pushing it. So I do like using sit for kind of that evaluation piece in that moment. It tells me that the dog is engaged. They're interested in the same thing that I am in that moment. I'd like to keep moving forward. I'd like attention. I'd like food, whatever it is. And to that point, I really like using sit as that request behavior. I'd like something. I'd like what you're holding in your hand. I, the dog, would like what you, the human, are holding in your hand. I'd like to cross the street. I'd like to keep moving. I'd like to get some space. For that one, I actually might do something more clear than just a sit. But anytime my dog throws a sit at me, and this goes for dogs that I work with in the shelter, and it goes for the assistance dogs as well, if I haven't asked for a sit and that dog throws a sit at me, I'm going to ask, what do you want out of that? Why'd you do that? Right? Why'd you offer me that sit? Is it because it's comfortable right now? Or is it because you are asking for something, which is most of the time what's happening? It's like, hey, you have stopped paying attention to me. I would like to stop here and sniff this. I'm going to sit and anchor, plant into the ground. So again, going back to the adopter foster conversation, which is what we should be gearing kind of all these conversations towards, is those conversations with adopters and fosters. When I'm talking about a sit, I'm going to talk about it in the same way, right? What does this dog want? Are they listening? Are they engaged with me? And have the same conversation with the adopters. Release is one of my favorite cues, and I encourage all of you to work on this with your volunteers and your fosters and your adopters. Work with them on establishing a very clear release. So release means the next choice is up to you. And I love this. I love building this into greetings with people, right? Tell the dog, release. And then they're allowed to choose. Do I want to approach that person or not? Right? The next choice is up to you. You could do whatever you want now. I'm going to reward you regardless of what you do. I'm going to reward you if you choose to sit back here. I'm going to reward you if you choose to approach. I'm going to reward you if you go off sniffing that direction, right? Whatever happens next, I'm going to get it happy about it. And maybe not reward you with food, but reward you with something. But love using this for greetings with people. My greeting routine with people usually includes a release as part of there. So we got sit, got release. Recall, come to me and let me grab your collar. One of my personal rules is that the recall only gets rewarded when I grab that dog's collar or make some sort of physical contact with their harness, leash, whatever it is. I need to make physical contact with you for that to be considered complete. How many dogs do we have that come up to me I'm like, good. And then I go reach for it and then they back up. So I really like talking about this with fosters and adopters to talk about the potential difficulty of training and setting expectations for what off leash looks like, right? They're like, I want to take the dog to the beach and let them off leash. That's great. Are you willing to practice recall a lot before that point? Are you willing to do multiple training sessions a day with something really, really high value to get to that point? Because if not, probably shouldn't go, right? And then that's also kind of setting expectations or influencing the conversation I'm having with that potential adopter. If they come in, they're like, hi, I want to take a dog today and go to the beach. I'm on my way to the beach right now. I want a dog to come with me and I'm going to let them off leash. Okay. Really small pool of dogs, depending on the size of my shelter, might be no dogs that really could handle that at this point, are likely to be successful in that at this point. So when we're talking about recall, I want to talk about expectations with those fosters, adopters, volunteers, and then also talking about distractions and motivations. Why should that dog come to you? I literally asked this to students, training clients, like, why should that dog come to you? Because there's a squirrel over there that's really, really cool. Why should they come back to you? Because you want it really bad? They want that squirrel really bad. They want that garbage over there really bad, right? There's all kinds of, like, we have competing motivations here. And if you expect that dog to just be motivated by that desire to please you, there's a time and place for that. We talked about that with assistance dogs a little bit. But if this dog doesn't know you, what motivation do they have to come back to you in that moment, right? Blunt conversations with people that I'm framing positively. I'm not saying you're a monster for letting your dog off leash. Setting expectations. What does off leash look like? What does that look like with this dog? What does it look like with that dog? Let's go means I'm changing direction or speed. I really, really like establishing this for my super strong pullers on leash. Let's go does not mean walk right next to me in a perfect, beautiful heel. Let's go just means follow the general direction where I'm going. Let's go means you could be anywhere at the end of that 6-foot leash as long as you're not yanking me, right? You're not like pulling ahead like this, but you can wander around. When I say let's go, you can weave back and forth if it's appropriate for the context, right? You can weave back and forth. You can smell over here. You can smell over there. You can fall behind me a little bit. You can catch back up. You can go a little bit forward. Really important to set that expectation with people, because if I've got that really strong puller in the shelter and the person says, I want the dog to walk in a heel for the whole walk, that's probably not a great match, right? I want a dog that wants to walk right next to me through the entire walk. Probably want a smaller dog that is going to kind of walk at the same pace, want to walk at the same pace as you. Because this big, huge, not to stereotype or generalize, this big, huge husky probably wants to walk a little bit faster than you. So let's go. So talking about let's go. I want to establish that expectation with people that, like, it's okay for your dog to wander around during a walk. It's okay to let them sniff. Let's go is that cue that you're going to use to get them to change direction, change their speed, whatever it is. Here's also where we talk about equipment and tools. And I know that this is a constant conversation in dog training, which it absolutely should be. What tools am I comfortable using as a trainer? What tools are you comfortable using as a handler? What tools are my fosters comfortable with? What tools are my adopters comfortable with? There are plenty of tools that even something as simple as a harness, right? We use these harnesses here that if I handed this to somebody that doesn't understand, that isn't familiar with a freedom harness, they're gonna look at this and go, how do I put this together? Because this looks like this looks way too confusing for me. And I'm just like new to dogs in general. And so this is gonna be way too complicated. Right, so let's talk about tools honestly, and let's just say, are you comfortable using a harness like this, or do we need something simpler? Maybe we like the step-in harnesses, but this dog's got some sensitivities about their feet being touched, and so if I got to touch their feet every single time that I put them in the harness, probably not a good fit for them. So in this same conversation where we talk about let's go, we talk about expectations walking on leash, we can also talk about equipment that they're comfortable using. And also how frequently you're going for a walk. Like I mentioned before, not all dogs enjoy walks, and that's okay, because not all people enjoy going for walks with their dogs. Plenty of people enjoy going for walks without their dog. Let's get them a dog that also doesn't like going, that can hang out at the house while they're out doing their people walk. Heel, should all basically know a heel, look at me and stay close. I emphasize to adopters and fosters, when we are talking about loose leash walking, when I'm talking about a dog that struggles with passing by other dogs, passing by people, pulling on leash, whatever it is, when you say heel, that is for very brief instances like crossing the street, passing by a dog, passing by a person, thrown in there randomly just so that we're practicing it. But that heel is not for the full walk. And if somebody comes in with that expectation and we can't reach a mutual understanding where they're like, no, a heel is supposed to be for the entire walk. I'm going to look at my program and see, do I have a dog that's going to enjoy that? Do I have a dog that's going to benefit from that level of structure? There are plenty of dogs that benefit from that level of structure out for a walk. So during these conversations about training, during these conversations about setting expectations and what does the dog know, right? What training are we doing in the shelter? I want to emphasize that we're gearing those toward our adoption conversations or our foster conversations. Somebody comes in, wants a heel for the entire time. It's going to inform what dogs we're looking at. Okay, touch is one of my favorite cues of all time. This is a quick demo with potential adopter. I'm having them meet the dogs for the first time. I walk out, the first thing I do, so I'm like, hi, this is so-and-so. Look what he knows, touch. And I just present my hand like this, like, hi, dog, how's it going? Dog's like, what do you have on your hand? It's been in a treat bag. Come up and touch, good. Then I give a reward. Really, really simple behavior to teach, and most dogs will offer it to you fairly quickly. So really impressive right out the gate with that adopter. Also, asking the adopter to demo something like this can show you what their training experience is versus you asking the question of what is your training background? What's your experience level? Everybody's like, very high. Okay, that was a useless question. And now I'm just frustrated with you for no reason, right? Let's demo. To touch. This dog knows touch. Look, he touched. Can you demo that? And now we're establishing a polite greeting with people. The dog is walking up and offering a touch instead of walking up and like jumping up or mouthing or growling or whatever it is. Come up, offer a touch. Good. I give a treat back on me for that dog that wants some space. Got a little bit of physical contact. We back up. Right. So we build these sort of training sessions into that conversation with that adopter. That is maximizing my time. That is maximizing the effectiveness and efficiency of my time. If I'm going to practice a heel, I'm going to practice it in front of a potential adopter. We're going to find out, you and I together, we're going to sit down or walk around. We're going to walk around with that dog and find out where that dog's heel is at right now. Right in front of you, right? Why not? Same thing goes for touch. Here's touch, super easy. Potential adopter, foster, can you demo that for me? Not as a test, right? But just as a, where is kind of your handling level at? This is how this dog greets people, is how I usually frame it. This dog greets people by bumping them on the hand. Out. We'll talk about resource guarding as a barrier to adoption. If I've got a really, really solid out, get out of this space that you're currently in right now. If that dog knows that extremely well, I'm out of the resource guarding conversation, right? We're going to disclose, hey, we've seen some resource guarding stuff here in the shelter. Literally 50-50 chance whether or not that's going to translate to a home. We've got research here. It's a research article that talks about that. Or we've seen it in a foster home. It's pretty likely that you might see it as well. We've been working on an out, which just means walk away from whatever space you're in, right? Going back to our original point, if training something like an out is not safe because the dog is exhibiting behavior that is so extreme that it's not a safe situation for a potential adopter or foster, that's where I take that look at my program and I say, can my program support this dog until we get to a safe point where I can plate this dog out into a foster home or an adoptive home? And if the answer is no, we need to explore alternative outcomes and not just hold on to the dog until I build an entire program, because that's really not fair to that dog. I also really like out for small dogs. People are worried that the small dog's gonna be under their feet. Or even the big dog. I mean, my big dog wants nothing more than to be right under my feet as soon as I get home. Walk in the door. If he really wants to be there today, I'm like, out, get out, move away. It's like, okay, I'll back up here. I'll go do a lap around the couch. So we can't safely train an out. in the shelter context, which is like tossing treats away from me, or using body language to get the dog to move away from you. That's not safe to do. Let's go back to that safety conversation. Can my program support this dog safely? Place stationing, one of my favorite things of all time. I'm not going to belabor this point too much, but there are so many uses for place. And I love demoing this to a potential adopter because I can usually get a place fairly quickly just by getting that treat right on the dog's nose, luring them over to that spot, rewarding on that spot. Looks really impressive and flashy, even if that dog hasn't done it very much prior to that point. And great to talk to potential adopters in that moment about, hey, when you have visitors come over to the house, what do you want the dog to do? I want the dog to walk up calmly. Okay, this dog likes seeing people. He gets excited when he sees people. You can either squash that joy and say, I want this dog to not enjoy being around people, or we can tell the dog to go contain your excitement over there and we'll come over to you when we're ready, or we'll call you over when we're ready, right? Likewise, I've got this dog that's like, I'm pretty nervous about people coming in through the front door. Great, you've got a place that is on the opposite side of the house over there. You're welcome to go over and hang out in that place, and we will all leave you alone. We'll pretend that you're invisible over there. So instead of, I have to modify what this dog thinks about all people while they're in my program in the shelter, which is likely very unrealistic, depending on the severity of the case. Let's teach a management tool that we can use in the meantime, and we can demo that to an adopter. And I don't have to have a huge training background to do it. I can literally lure the dog over with something that they want, whether it's attention from me, a toy, a treat, whatever. Lure the dog over to that spot, reward them when they get there. Nice and easy. Drop it. Anytime we have the resource guarding conversation, I always kind of bring it back to like, well, how often do I need to get something out of this dog's mouth? How often are they picking up things that they shouldn't be eating? Can I just train a rock solid drop it instead? Like, do I have to stick my hand in the dog? Do I have to have the dog be comfortable with me sticking my hand in their mouth? Or can I just train a really rock solid drop it? And 9 times out of 10, at least in my experience, I can just teach a rock solid drop it. I don't need to be sticking my hand in every dog's mouth. Same thing goes for arousal cases, for leash biting cases, right? Can I train that drop it and then alternatively a get it, right? Drop it. Here's a toy. You can get this. Don't hold on to that leash. You get this toy instead. So can I train that drop it? Demoing that right in front of the adopter, wherever the dog is at, right? Wherever that dog is at right now, I'm going to demo that with the adopter and say, here's how we've been working on it, or here's how I would work on it here in this moment with this dog, doing a training session right in front of you, potential adopter. Here's how I would do it. Do you do it a different way? Do you do it the same way with me? Should we reconcile that? Should we try your way? See if it is more effective. If it's more effective, love to see. Let's talk about risks of training. If they're training drop it in a very punitive sort of way where we're like plugging the dog's nose or doing something that the dog doesn't like in order to get the dog to spit it out. Let's talk about the risk associated with that, right? Hey, if we do something like that, just want to let you know that you're risking that the dog is going to start snapping at your fingers because he doesn't like that, right? If you're comfortable with that risk and you're comfortable getting bit in the future, that's fine. That's on you. And actually, if that sounds like an unrealistic conversation with an adopter, I actually had that conversation with a potential adopter who was comfortable with the dog jumping up and mouthing pretty intensely on his arms, and he was like really comfortable playing like that with the dog. I said, hey, that's great that you're comfortable with this. Obviously, we got the dog back out of the way while we're having this conversation so we can actually focus. That's great that you're comfortable playing like that, and this dog seems to really enjoy doing that with you. However, I need you to recognize that moving forward, you will be this dog's last owner if you continue to do that. There will not be somebody else that can play like that with this dog. This is possibly gonna get this dog in trouble in the future because not everybody likes playing like that. So I just want you to recognize that, like, if you want to play like that, that's on you, right? I can't control your behavior, but I want to let you know that the only option I have for a dog that only wants to play like that is probably either euthanasia or we're going to find a different rescue, depending on what I can handle in my program. Literally had that blunt conversation like that, and the outcome of that conversation was like, I had never even thought about that. didn't even consider it. I apologize for doing it in the first place. Like, I totally get where you're coming from. Straightforward, kind of blunt conversation. Leave it is one of my training pet peeves. If we're training a leave it in the shelter, please define what you mean when you say leave it. And I want it in writing, what you mean when you say leave it, because I cannot tell you how many times I have worked with trainers from all backgrounds, from all different fields, where when you ask them, what do you mean when you say leave it? Like, I want the dog to leave it alone. Okay, behaviorally, what does that look like? Because you just told the dog that they weren't allowed to look at it, right? But they didn't even see what it was before you said leave it. So how can they clock what it is that they're supposed to, right? We're in this really weird conversation between the dog and the trainer, where the dog is like, I have no idea what this person is asking for. And if you cannot define in writing what you mean when you say something like this, we probably shouldn't be asking the dog for it. If you're not clear about what it means, the dog is definitely very unclear as to what you're trying to communicate here. So define in writing what your leave it means. Does it mean look at the object and then look away from it? Does it mean look at me? Does it mean look at the ground? Does it mean come touch my hand? Like, what does leave it mean? Define that in terms of behavior. And define it in terms of behavior that the dog does, not that the dog doesn't do. Oh, the dog doesn't go for it. Okay, what does the dog do? There's always behavior happening. What does the dog do? Same thing goes for, like, in a practical level. If I'm looking at a dog where I've got some level of resource sharding challenges, again, we've established that this behavior is reasonably safe within my program. We're going to work on a leave it. Maybe I use this in combination with drop it and out, right? I've got this here. I want it. You shouldn't have it. I'm the dog. You human should not have this. Drop it. Okay. You're not coming any closer. Human's not coming any closer. Drop it. Out. Dog backs up. Good. Leave it. Okay. Right. The dog gets rewarded for all that stuff. We're building a positive association, and then I can go up to the object and I can either take it or leave it where it is, because I probably don't want it that bad. The dog's guarding it. Right. But I can move the dog away from whatever it is. So again, we're going to have all of these training conversations with the adopter, there with the adopter. So there are worksheets on all of these. I was going to go through them in a little more depth, but there are worksheets on all of these that I'm more than happy to share with anybody. Please send me an email, let me know. If you want them, if you can't access them on Maddie's Pet Forum or anything, there are handouts for what all of these mean, all the things that I covered today. They're there. They're in those handouts. Last point, and then we should have like 5 minutes for questions, maybe. When we are looking at a behavior and training program, I strongly encourage you to look at what data you can get out of it. Really, really important to look at that data and look at, how am I defining the success of this program? How am I defining it beyond just like, I like that it's happening, right? Define it in really objective terms, get some data out of it, and look at like, what is the measurable outcome here? Okay, I'm going to leave this slide up while I answer questions. Thank you all so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for being here today, for taking the time to be here with me, talking about something that I get really excited talking about. I'm always more than happy to talk to anybody about any of this stuff, but I don't know if there's any questions.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any in the Q&A. Give everybody just a second or two, just in case there are. So thank you so much, Devan. That was wonderful. Thank you to everyone for watching today's webcasts. We have one question. Valerie is wondering, they said they love the worksheets. How do we email you?
Yeah. So worksheets are, I think Kelly just dropped them in the chat, or Kim just dropped them in the chat. Handouts for today's presentation are there. But my email is just devan@animalwelfareunited.com. So Devan, DEVAN @animalwelfareunited.com. You can email me. If you go to my website, my email is also all over the place on there. So you're welcome to send me an email through my website as well.
Awesome. Also, Becca Edwards says hello.
Hi, Becca.
All right,
If anybody
thank you so
wants to
much.
see a great example of an amazing program working with behavior, check out Humane Society for Inland Mendocino County. That's where Becca's from. Great
Awesome.
behavior program.
All right. So thank you to everyone who's watching today's webcast, and many thanks to Devan. If you have any questions after, hold on, one just came in. Can you provide examples of measurable objectives for data?
Absolutely. So I love a 1 to 5 scale, really accessible for people, and can kind of take subjective data and turn it into objective data. So asking volunteers on a scale of 1 to 5, how was this dog's jumpiness today, right? Compiling all that kind of stuff and looking at, we're seeing a decrease or we're seeing an increase or we're seeing this staying the same, even though I'm seeing that the dog's getting training sessions marked off every day. So using that 1 to 5 scale can be really helpful. Looking at your length of stay and saying, let's take this group of dogs, let's take a group of 25 dogs for whatever period of time, and look at, is this behavior modification decreasing their length of stay compared to these 25 dogs that didn't get it today? And then let's compare that to how this dog does out in foster, right? Let's take all these different pieces. So I like length of stay, and I also really like a good 1 to 5 scale to give me some measurable data, or even just an in the moment session. I sit down with the dog and I literally count how many times the dog jumped on me in that 15-minute session. Maybe I do that once a week for a couple of weeks and just start gathering that kind of data. It's a fantastic question. I'd love to explore that more with any shelter that wants to talk about it. Love to explore it more.
Awesome. All right. Devan will be available for the next few days on Maddie's Pet Forum to continue the discussion. So if you have questions that pop up, feel free to post them there. And thank you all so much for coming, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much.